first F1 car of Mercedes' post-Lewis Hamilton era has arrived, and there's a huge amount riding on this for a team that's still working through a period of painful readjustment. The heady days of multiple championships increasingly feel like a distant, hazy memory. The team has become, in its own words, trapped in a doom cycle of troubleshooting problematic cars with inconsistent performance profiles, and now the most successful, highest profile driver in F1's and Mercedes history has departed for Ferrari. 2025 is year zero of Mercedes without Hamilton, who says he feels invigorated by switching teams. Mercedes will be hoping it can find its own new lease of life without him. This is a team still with much to prove again in F1, despite George Russell's increasingly impressive form and the run of relative success he enjoyed towards the end of 2024, which included a win, 2 pole positions and 3 front row starts over the final 4 races of the season. Mercedes unveiled its new car, the W16, with some studio imagery ahead of a shakedown test in Bahrain the day before pre-season testing. Technical director James Allison says Mercedes' main development focus has been dialing out the slow-speed understeer that plagued the 2024 car. The team described the new design as a revamp with sizable changes made. Mercedes says that has led to changes to every aerodynamic surface, new front suspension and further changes under the skin of the W16 to remedy some of the more challenging characteristics of its predecessor. Unlike some teams during this hectic and unusual launch season, Mercedes at least did us the courtesy of releasing some genuine studio photography, rather than obscure digital renders. And these pictures reveal a few striking visual changes to the car's topside aerodynamic surfaces. Side pods have been a bane for Mercedes during this ground effect rules era, and having gradually moved away from the much derided zero pod architecture of 2022 and early 2023 to a more conventional shape with a P-shaped inlet, now it looks as though Mercedes has followed Red Bull's lead with a split horizontal and vertical T-shaped inlet. The sidepod itself has a new shape to it, with the bulk of the cooling apparatus underneath seemingly brought forward and lowered to create a more aggressive undercut and a steeper ramp along the top side to help energise airflow to the powerful underfloor. The amount of exposed floor area we can see suggests Mercedes, like most teams, appear to be shrink-wrapping their cooling equipment underneath the sidepods. Now their understanding of the heat rejection requirements of the hybrid engines on this generation of cars has increasingly improved. That tight sidepod packaging and exposed floor area suggests a gain in overall aerodynamic efficiency, which should deliver a straight line speed boost if the aerodynamicists haven't been too greedy with their demands on what the engine can tolerate. The taper of the cannons on the side of the engine cover are a further hint that Mercedes has revised its cooling layout for aerodynamic gain at the rear of the car. The bodywork profile below those cannons sweeps inwards to allow more of the mass airflow to get into the middle of the car to the beam wing, diffuser and under the upper wing. There are no massive surprises from Mercedes in terms of its wing and suspension layouts. Mercedes long ago abandoned the unusual 2024 front wing design that was missing sections of its 2 rearmost elements, and the 2025 launch spec front wing looks very similar in shape to the one Mercedes finished 2024 with, though the nose tip shape and the way it joins the main plane is different, almost reverting to the 2022 to 2023 style of attaching the tip and eliminating the slot gap immediately underneath. This could be the first attempt at loading that part of the front wing more at low speeds, but at a potential trade-off of consistency of airflow to the floor at high speed when the car is running lower to the ground. Mercedes retains the pushrod front and rear suspension layout from 2024, though the race's F1 technical expert Gary Anderson does think there is a touch more anti-lift engineered into the rear suspension layout, presumably because Mercedes needs that to better control the car's platform for low ride heights and under heavy braking, to help retain a decent balance at low speed and combat the rear sliding that was overheating the rear tyres so badly last season. The floor and rear wing shapes on the launch spec car look broadly similar to what Mercedes finished 2024 with, but as these, like the front wing, are bolt-on components, we can probably expect updated versions to appear when the car hits the track for pre-season testing. Mercedes believes the significant change in how it's approached developing this 2025 car can help it avoid a trap it has fallen into in recent seasons. Although 2024 was comfortably Mercedes' most successful of the new ground effect era in terms of race victories achieved, those peak results belied yet more difficulties and inconsistencies. Russell and Hamilton both struggled with the car's balance, particularly in qualifying, and were often overheating the rear tyres, something which made Mercedes devastatingly effective in the near Arctic conditions of the Las Vegas night race, but otherwise severely compromised their race pace compared to the other top teams. Ahead of the final year of the current rule set, before the major regulations overhaul coming for 2026, Russell has opened up on a different approach that the team is taking with its revised W16, calling the changes on this car significant and suggesting Mercedes has been more disciplined with the overhaul on this car compared to previous seasons. The problem in the past, Russell says, is that Mercedes' attempts to solve the problems it's uncovered through the previous season have simply created new problems. That is the doom cycle we mentioned earlier, what Russell calls a trap that Mercedes keeps falling into. Pushed to elaborate on what he meant by a trap, Russell said the mistake Mercedes had made previously was obsessing on curing specific problems without considering negatives that could emerge as unintended consequences. For this car, Mercedes has tried to take what Russell calls a more forward-thinking approach, rather than tunnelling in on one specific major issue. From what Russell has been saying in pre-season, it sounds like Mercedes, like all teams in this challenging ground effect era, has been struggling to make its cars faster without creating fundamental balance problems that can't be resolved with simple setup tweaks and a bit of on-track understanding. Like McLaren, Mercedes made a big step forward last season by developing a flexible front wing that widened that setup window, but it still wasn't enough to make Mercedes a victory threat in every condition and on every type of circuit. Cold, wet, fast tracks, pretty strong. Hot, dry, slow ones, not so much. Russell believes Mercedes is still playing catch-up with its fundamental understanding of these rules because of the overbearing impact that porpoising had on its original ground effect car of 2022. He says that problem took 18 months to fix and meanwhile masks some other poor characteristics of Mercedes' design. The suspension was identified as the root of those poor characteristics, but changing that caused a balance problem. On top of that is the generic challenge of these regulations, where budgets are capped and aerodynamic testing is restricted. Apart from 2024 Constructors' Champions McLaren, pretty much every other top team has run into unexpected problems with upgrades, which have sometimes taken months to unpick and fix. As Russell says, sometimes something works and you don't really know why, and sometimes something doesn't work and you don't really know why. He obviously hopes the significant changes on Mercedes' 2025 car will result in some progress on track, but equally he knows it will take until the W16 tests in Bahrain later this week to truly know whether there's been any serious improvement. We've heard a lot of positive talk from Mercedes ahead of each of the past 3 seasons, and results have never matched expectations. In the past, Russell says the team has known within the first 5 laps of testing that it wouldn't be fighting for championships. The aim is obviously to change that broken record, but against an ultra-competitive field working to mature and well-understood regulations, what Russell calls the improved robustness of Mercedes' winter development will be stress-tested like never before in 2025. Mercedes heads into this post-Hamilton era with a very different driver dynamic. From having one of F1's most successful, famous, experienced and oldest drivers, Mercedes has now brought in rookie teenager Kimi Antonelli as teammate to George Russell. Antonelli is one of the most exciting young prospects out there, and the team has high hopes that he has the speed needed to deliver immediately in F1. But that's not to say he arrives on the grid with no question marks hanging over him, especially because he's still lacking experience that potentially leaves him open to making rookie mistakes. That much was clear at last year's Italian Grand Prix, when Antonelli's first outing on a Formula 1 weekend in the opening free practice ended with a big crash at the final corner after only a handful of laps. Team boss Toto Wolff clearly believes in Antonelli's fundamental ability, describing him openly as the new Max Verstappen. But it's still a risk to put an 18-year-old driver straight into a works F1 team without the apprenticeship Verstappen served at Red Bull's second team or that Russell served at Mercedes' customer team Williams. Arguably, not since Lewis Hamilton made his F1 debut with McLaren in 2007 has a driver faced such a difficult baptism as Antonelli faces this year. Being a bit rough around the edges is why Mercedes has done everything it can to give Antonelli valuable testing mileage in old F1 cars. He did a full programme of testing in that troublesome 2022 car last year, and Mercedes even had him out in a 2020 car at the start of 2025 for some extra driver training mileage that wouldn't eat up his allowance under F1's new, more stringent testing of previous cars rules, which now limit current F1 drivers to 1,000 kilometres of running in 2-year-old cars. With Antonelli likely needing some time to learn everything needed to be successful in F1, the onus will be on team leader Russell to establish himself as the clear number one. He will feel boosted by a 2024 season where he comprehensively outqualified teammate Hamilton. It was a year that Russell says was his strongest so far in F1, and that's something we at the race agreed with, placing him 4th in our end of season driver rankings. But despite the qualifying strengths, Russell admits there is still room for improvement when it comes to race pace. There were times last year where, despite having started well ahead of Hamilton on the grid, Russell ended up fighting with him or even being overtaken right at the end, as happened in the season finale in Abu Dhabi, because he couldn't quite get as much out of the car and tyres. Should Mercedes deliver its drivers the car they need to fight at the front this year, then it could open up the fascinating prospect of Russell getting involved in some tussles with Verstappen. Last year, things got quite heated between them after a bust-up at the Qatar Grand Prix, where Verstappen was handed a grid penalty for impeding Russell in qualifying. Some harsh words between them in the stewards' room triggered an explosion in Abu Dhabi as Russell let rip at Verstappen's behaviour, which he said was out of order. Though the chapter has been closed on that specific incident, it will likely lead to some robust racing between them when they get close on track again. But if Mercedes hasn't taken the step forward Russell anticipates with its 2025 car, then wars of words with Verstappen will be the very least of his worries.